Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Thursday, November 25th. This is Africa 54.
Ethiopia's prime minister heads to the front line of the conflict as Olympians enlist in the army. Sudan's Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok vows to release political prisoners in the coming days. And in Zimbabwe, a former boxing champ hopes to knock out drugs.
At least 8 people were killed and 17 wounded Thursday in a suicide car bombing targeting a security convoy near a school in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. Among those killed were 13 children. It is the latest in a string of deadly blasts this year in a country beset by political turmoil and drought. Clara Frank has more.
Militant group Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility for a huge blast in the Somali capital, Mogadishu, which witnesses and officials said was a suicide attack targeting a United Nations security convoy. A police spokesman said several had died and more injured in the attack by a suicide bomber in an SUV full of explosives. Al-Shabaab regularly carries out bombings and gun assaults in Somalia, but this blast was so large that the walls of a nearby primary and secondary school collapsed. Yusuf Hussein is the school's director.
7 pupils were wounded in the explosion near the school. Some classrooms were destroyed in the explosion. You can see that some of the school and buses were also damaged in the explosion.
The attack near the K4 junction in the heart of the capital left cars mangled and sent a plume of smoke into the sky. Witnesses said gunfire echoed around the scene. It was not immediately clear if any UN personnel were among those killed or injured. Clara Frank, Washington.
Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has gone to direct the war from the front lines, according to state affiliate media. Abiy has announced late on Monday that he was planning to personally direct the fight against the Tigrayan forces and their allies. Meanwhile, Olympic champion Haile Gebrselassie has pledged to join Ethiopia's military forces on the front line in the battle against the Tigray People's Liberation Front, despite acknowledging that as a sportsman, he is an ambassador of peace. David Doyle has more.
Ethiopian Olympic gold medalist and national hero Haile Gebrselassie says he is willing to pay the ultimate price after pledging to join the fight against rebellious forces in his country.
There is no way that I can sit here due to fear, because it will come to my door, it will come to my house. We wouldn't know when it comes, we wouldn't know who will do what.
The 48-year-old retired champion was speaking after Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said he would be heading to the front lines to direct the war against the Tigray People's Liberation Front. The year-long conflict has killed thousands, forced millions from their homes, and left 400,000 in Tigray facing famine. Haile, who broke 27 long-distance records, said though he believes a sportsman is always an ambassador for peace, he nevertheless felt compelled to go to war.
Now, when I am saying I am going to the front line, people could say, what? Wait a minute. They could say, you have been a mediator and you're a sportsman. Sports is about peace and love. No. What would you do when the existence of a country is at stake? You just put down everything. Alas, nothing will blind you. I am sorry.
Last month, Tigrayan rebels threatened that they would march on the capital. That prompted Abiy to declare a 6-month state of emergency and urge citizens to take up arms and prepare to defend themselves. The international community has urged both sides in the conflict to lay down their weapons. But earlier this week, US Special Envoy Jeffrey Feltman warned that an escalation in military operations is undermining any progress towards talks.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. United Nations Secretary General António Guterres called for an end to fighting in Ethiopia while in Colombia's capital Bogota on Wednesday, urging Ethiopian leaders to follow the Andean country's example of peace.
El proceso de paz de Colombia me inspira a ser hoy.
The peace process in Colombia today inspires me to take an urgent call to the protagonists of the conflict in Ethiopia for an unconditional and immediate ceasefire, to save the country and to allow for dialogue between Ethiopians, to resolve the crisis and allow for Ethiopia to go back to contributing to stability in the region. I would like Colombia to be an example to follow for the leaders of Ethiopia.
War in Ethiopia broke out in November 2020 in the country's Tigray region between Ethiopian federal troops and the Tigray People's Liberation Front. In July, the conflict spread into two neighboring regions in northern Ethiopia. Hundreds of Sudanese protested in the streets of Khartoum and other cities on Thursday, keeping up the pressure on military leaders after they struck a deal to bring back a civilian prime minister deposed in a coup. 1 month ago, protesters also closed a main road in the Sahafa neighborhood of the capital. Carrying Sudanese flags, they chanted, "Burhan, you won't rule. Down with military rule," referring to Sudan's military leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. Live streams on social media also showed protests in cities including Port Sudan, Kassala, Wadamadani, and El Geneina. Prominent political parties and Sudan's powerful protest movement have opposed Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok's decision on Sunday to sign the accord with the military, with some calling it a betrayal or saying it provides political cover for the takeover. Still, in Sudan, recently reinstated Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok said on Wednesday that political prisoners will be released in the next couple of days, even as protests continue over a military takeover. Olivia Chan has more.
Political prisoners in Sudan will be released in the next couple of days. That message coming from recently reinstated Prime Minister Abdalla Hamdok. His government was toppled in a military coup last month, but he was returned to office under an agreement signed on Sunday.
The first point in this agreement is to release political prisoners. I can say that these jailed comrades, whether in the cabinet or in any other positions, will be released very soon, today or tomorrow.
But Hamdok faces a battle to win support from civilian groups and convince them that he can act independently of the military. Pro-democracy groups have continued their protest against the military takeover. Medics aligned with protest groups say dozens have been killed in increasingly violent crackdowns. Hamdok said the right to peaceful protest has been earned by the Sudanese people over decades of struggle.
We talked very seriously with the security bodies in order not to resist these protests. For sure, this is the biggest test for this agreement, to protect the peacefulness of these protests. If it does not happen, it is not in favor of the agreement. We will be keen to achieve this, and we will do it.
Hamdok is due to name a cabinet of technocrats and said any appointments or dismissals made since the coup would be reviewed. As long as he is Prime Minister, Hamdok said he would protect the executive from interference, adding that if I can't, I will go.
That was Olivia Chan of Reuters reporting. Tanzania will now allow girls aged 12 to 19 years who left school due to pregnancy to resume formal education after giving birth, the country's education minister announced on Wednesday. This ends a ban on the return of such students, which has been criticized by rights groups as discriminatory. The move comes after a June announcement by the ministry that secondary school dropouts, including girls who became pregnant while in school, would be able to resume studies in alternative colleges. According to the World Bank, more than 120,000 girls drop out of school annually in Tanzania, more than 6,000 of whom were due to pregnancy or having children. In Zimbabwe, a former boxing champion is using his skills to teach the next generation and hopefully help keep impoverished young people away from drugs and crime. Columbus Mavunga reports from Harare.
24-year-old António Mapako was a street fighter and drug user from this poor suburb of Mbare. But he says things have changed since he joined the Mosquito Boxing School of Excellence. And he credits the school's founder and coach, Zenika Alfonso.
I always say thank you, coach, when I started to say this statement. Why? Because I know he's not just a teacher of boxing, but he can change even your mind about the bad things you think to do. He can change you.
44-year-old Alfonso started the academy after he left boxing. As a fighter, he was known as Mosquito for the way he would sting his opponents. Now, his focus is on helping troubled youths.
I'm in this project because I wanted to remove kids from drug abuse and womanizing and stealing, because there's a lot of crimes which are committed by these young guys.
Alfonso now has about 120 students divided into 3 groups per day. He hopes some become professional boxers. The Zimbabwe government says substance abuse among youth is a scourge that needs to be addressed as soon as possible.
We are working with law enforcement agents to try and curb, illicit substances coming into the country. And in terms of demand, we are working, to try and educate members of the public around the dangers of, engagement in illicit, substance abuse.
Alfonso is working to set up programs in other poor townships and pull more youths away from drugs. Columbus Mavunga for VOA News, Harare, Zimbabwe.
South African scientists said Thursday that they have detected a new COVID-19 variant in small numbers and are working to understand its potential implications. The variant, called B11529, has a very unusual constellation of mutations which are concerning because they could help it evade the body's immune response and make it more transmissible, according to the scientists. Early signs from diagnostic laboratories suggest the variant has rapidly increased in the most populated province of Gauteng and may already be present in the other country's 8 provinces. The variant has also been found in Botswana and Hong Kong, with the Hong Kong case a traveler from South Africa. Nearly 2 years into the COVID-19 pandemic, the United States is facing a crisis in the medical field. Many of the country's 4 million nurses are leaving the industry, putting patients at risk. VOA's Caroline Presutti looks at where the healthcare industry is headed.
A veteran emergency room nurse we will call Clara is so worried about her profession that what she's about to say could get her fired. Many months into the COVID-19 pandemic, Clara says hospitals are so short-staffed that patients are dying in the emergency room who might otherwise be saved, including one of her female patients.
Ultimately, by the time someone was able to get to her, she was at a point of disrepair. That's the best way I can describe that. We weren't able to fix her, and ultimately she died. That's hard to carry.
Family members are sent to hospital parking lots for lack of space as the sick wait most of the day to be seen.
People are literally shoulder to shoulder. You could be sitting next to someone that is COVID positive and you're not. It could be 6, 8, 10, 12, 16 hours before you get that care that you need to get better.
You heard right. She said up to 16 hours before any treatment.
It definitely is a crisis.
Abigail Donley left the hospital ICU earlier this year to create the advocacy group Impact in Healthcare to fight for policy change. She spoke on Skype.
Nursing ratios are terrible. The workload has become unbearable. Nurses are getting hit. They're being verbally abused.
The American Nurses Foundation says the pandemic is causing 9 out of 10 nurses to think about leaving their hospital jobs. Half say inadequate staffing is the main reason. So where are they going?
Travel nurse.
Travel nursing.
Travel nurses.
Travel nursing.
Michelle doesn't want us to give her real name because she's in the minority of nurses who are unvaccinated. She left her hospital when a COVID vaccine mandate was introduced. An agency hired her as a travel nurse to fly wherever she is needed for short contracts.
I'll literally be making in 1 week what it takes me a month to earn.
Nurse Jonny Sorber loves his New Jersey job and his colleagues. The nurse in the middle left for a travel nurse job in Alaska that pays $10,000 a week.
It's just absurd.
Yet tempting for Sorber and his young family. Sorber says hospitals need to find a way to retain and lessen the stress on veteran nurses.
I think just higher pay. At least something. Like higher pay, and there's always a shortage of nurses. If you could get the right amount of nurses so you don't actually have to work harder.
We asked the American Hospital Association about that idea, higher pay and more nurses. They had no official comment, but sent VOA a document asking Congress and the Biden administration to intervene, to, quote, use its authority to investigate anti-competitive pricing, unquote, from agencies hiring travel nurses. But for now, some hospital nurses are at the point of complete exhaustion, with compassion fatigue, a lowered ability to empathize. They were thrown into a pandemic war beyond their control and are still fighting, with ever fewer staff.
So just try to be kind. We want to do what's best for you, and where we're at right now in healthcare is really scary.
For nurses and their patients. Carolyn Persutti, VOA News.
Let us know what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, why the U.S. and other nations accuse China of cyber crimes. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54. China was behind one of the biggest hacks of all time, quietly stealing email and data from organizations, according to the U.S. and other nations' governments. Experts say China orchestrated attacks on strategic targets have increased in recent years. Michelle Quinn reports.
On a January evening, the cybersecurity firm Velocity, which is always looking for anything unusual on the networks of its clients, including governments, the defense industry, and financial firms, detected an anomaly.
Where we're looking at what was large byte transfer, basically large amounts of data leaving one of our customers' networks. Hair in our arms raising a little bit, we're kind of alarms going off at this point.
That discovery turned out to be a stealth operation to exploit an unknown vulnerability in Microsoft Exchange, an email server used by businesses, governments, and other organizations that have large numbers of users. The hackers were stealing emails. The administration of U.S. President Joe Biden and its allies said the initial breach was the result of a Chinese state-sponsored hack. China has denied any connection to the Microsoft hack. An article in its state-run newspaper, Global Times, blamed the U.S. for cyber attacks against China. For Stephen Adair of Velocity, some early clues in the Microsoft Exchange hack pointed to China, such as the language in some of the code, where the data was going, and the kinds of targets.
So, kind of a pure cyber espionage play to where the goal is to get information, to get data, to get email. What they want exactly and what they do with it, we don't know. We can only speculate. But highly targeted operation, really under the radar.
While Russia-based hackers have been responsible for some of the biggest cyber attacks in the U.S., cybersecurity firms say that over the past 2 years, Beijing has directed more cyber operations, targeting countries in Asia as well as nations worldwide to gather social, economic, and political intelligence. In their recent virtual meeting, Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping discussed how to reduce cyber conflicts between the two countries.
I think what you're seeing now is this realization that actually the Chinese espionage efforts never disappeared and in fact became significantly more technologically sophisticated.
In the Microsoft Exchange hack, word of the weakness got out before the company created a patch. Hacking groups from around the world were able to exploit this virtual backdoor and indiscriminately attack targets.
We got organizations from all around the world, ranging from big defense contractors and government agencies down to like small mom and pop like shops, like funeral homes, like school districts. I put that up there as one of the worst or best, however you want to describe it, of hacks probably of all time.
President Biden recently signed a bipartisan infrastructure bill into law that includes nearly $2 billion for cybersecurity. Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan Thomas West will head to Doha, Qatar next week for meetings with Taliban leaders. The State Department says West told VOA the U.S. is deeply concerned about the humanitarian crisis in the country, as VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports.
Conditions are dire in many parts of Afghanistan, with the United Nations World Food Program saying almost 24 million people, or 60% of the population, are suffering from acute hunger. State Department spokesperson Ned Price said U.S. Special Representative Tom West will discuss issues of vital U.S. national interest, including counterterrorism and humanitarian assistance, with Taliban leaders in 2 days of meetings in Doha, Qatar. In an exclusive interview with VOA Tuesday, West said Afghanistan's worsening humanitarian crisis has a lot to do with the loss of international aid. The Afghan economy depended on that aid to a large degree over 20 years.
Some 75% of the former government's public expenditures were foreign donor funded. Some 40% of the country's GDP was foreign donor funded. And so really in our engagement, and frankly in our allies and partners' engagement with the Taliban over a period of years, we made clear that if they chose a military path to power, that aid would disappear, and that is what occurred.
Last week, the Taliban's foreign ministry spokesperson called on the U.S. Congress to release Afghan assets frozen after the Taliban takeover of the country. He said the economic misery at home could prompt a mass exodus and refugee problems for other countries. West said it is not as simple as the Taliban might think to get aid that is frozen in the U.S. and other countries moving again.
There are very complicated legal reasons as well as judicial reasons for why that money is not moving from particular banks into other places.
There has been some localized progress towards U.S. and international demands for the Taliban to respect human and women's rights. Schools for girls from grades 7 to 12 have reopened in Afghanistan's third largest city, Herat. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
Indian farmers have welcomed Prime Minister Narendra Modi's decision to repeal 3 controversial farm laws that sparked the longest and largest protest against his government. However, as Anjana Pasricha reports, the farmers plan to continue pressure on the government to meet other key demands.
These celebrations at protest sites near Delhi mark the victory farmers from North India have won with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent decision to repeal 3 contentious farm laws.
The truth always prevails. Our struggle was for a true cause. We were fighting for our rights. It was a peaceful but strong protest. This is a victory of the nation, the farmers.
It was a hard-won battle for farmers who camped and cooked on highways for a year, fearing that the pro-market reforms passed last year posed a threat to their land and livelihood.
This is the first time that the government has conceded to protesters' demands. Otherwise, dissenters are always chased away by police. But we, the Sikh community, were prepared to die for our cause.
But despite the rollback of the laws, it is uncertain when the protracted standoff will be over. Having savoured victory, farmers are pressing for other concessions, such as a legal commitment for guaranteed prices for all farm produce, a system prevalent only for some crops like rice and wheat.
Farmers from all over the country have supported our cause. Now we have to make sure everyone gets a guaranteed price for their crops.
The capitulation on the farm laws by Modi, a leader who seldom backs down, is widely attributed to the need to regain their support ahead of elections in key states. Farmers are a huge voting bloc.
The Prime Minister has stooped to conquer. I think he's calculated the balance of advantage lay in taking a back step than to continue with the standoff that had taken place.
But the year-long protest that weathered a harsh winter, summer, and even a pandemic has frayed trust between the farmers and the government. Days after the Prime Minister urged them to go home, they are still huddled along the highways.
Until we see in writing that the laws have been repealed by Parliament and the order is signed by the President, we will not vacate the highways.
The key question is, can Prime Minister Modi rebuild their trust and restore his image as a pro-farmer leader in the coming months? Anjana Pasricha for VOA News, New Delhi.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From the Africa 54 team here in Washington, thanks for watching.